All right. Thank you for coming here, class.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, can you first introduce yourself a bit to our audience?
Yeah, sure. My name is Claus Sivertsen. I'm originally from Norway, from a city called Kristiansund. It's on the west coast, in the middle of the country.
Okay. And what's your job here, and how did you come to Taiwan?
Yeah, I actually came here many years ago when I was living in Japan. I came to Taiwan on business trips to do semiconductor, to work with semiconductor companies and work on firmware and hardware design. So that was many years ago. But then later I ended up actually moving to Taiwan. I was working in Atlanta, Georgia, US, and I transferred my company to Taiwan. This pretty famous computer motherboard BIOS company that I was working for. So I came to Taiwan and spent 5 years there and really loved it. And after the 5 years, I got my APRC and then changed my career.
APRC is?
That's the Alien Permanent Resident card.
Ah, okay.
So that you're not tied to an employer or a wife or anything like that. So it's free to work for any company.
So it's basically like permanent residential permit?
Exactly. It's like a permanent resident card. Yeah. Right.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And so you've lived in Japan before and US before. Compared to those places, what part of Taiwan satisfy you the most, or what parts of Taiwan do you like the most?
Yeah, that's great. I definitely love the convenience of Taiwan. So since I'm an engineer, I've always been an engineer and a coder and a designer. So for me, Taiwan is kind of the perfect place where you can get anything built so quickly. You know, there's so many vendors here that can produce anything. If you need plastics or 3D printing or cables or circuit boards, the vendors are everywhere. So within a short 20 to 30 minute scooter ride or a car ride, you can find a vendor and you can basically walk into any company. And maybe it's kind of a privilege being a foreigner, but when you walk in there, usually it's the top management or the top boss will be the one who speaks English. So you get to talk to the boss right away. And then they're really helpful. I mean, I haven't met any company yet who would just bend over backwards just to help you and try to figure out what you want to do. And that's really great. Yeah.
Was it like one of the major reasons why you moved your company from Atlanta to here?
Yeah, so I had a chance to experience Taiwan before I moved here for quite a few years and on business trips. So I ended up staying here several months every year before I moved there. So I felt like I knew what the vibe of Taiwan was and what the opportunities were before I moved. And when the opportunity came up for me to transfer, then I was very eager to take that. Yeah.
And you also said about like your work is involves a lot of like semiconductors and machine building and stuff. How do you feel about like when semiconductor and the Taiwan issue is being discussed in a internationalized way right now?
Yeah, so it's very hard to catch up with TSMC and their technology. The whole world. I mean, those are the world leaders, and they're so far ahead of anybody else, right? So I think that's of course a major advantage for Taiwan, and it's very. I don't think we really deal with those big guys directly, but there's all those vendors underneath the whole subsystem of companies, right? So it's definitely very convenient because of that. Yeah.
And can you also introduce us a little bit more about the content of your job here or the projects you've been doing recently?
Yeah, right. Well, this is kind of timely. I didn't know when I started out that it's going to go this way, but I was working as a consultant for a vaccine company for a couple of years after I got my APRC, and I was working with them to develop PCR machines. And this is 5-6 years ago now, but way before the pandemic. But I didn't know back then that it was going to turn out the way. Now I think everybody knows what a PCR machine is, or at least what a PCR test is, right? So I was working on those machines and connecting to the cloud and getting results to the cloud from the machines, and learning about the process of PCR and how to develop reagents and such, and learned quite a bit about vaccines as well, visiting the vaccine factories that they set up in Taiwan. So I always wanted to work in biology. My background is in chemistry and physics, but I was, and then I got into electronics, but I always felt that I wanted to work in biology, and this is kind of my chance. Yeah, well, that's at least the background for it. So when the first notices came out of Wuhan that there was a new virus, then of course I paid close attention to it, and I've been studying for many years. I'm a big fan of a podcast that's called TWIV, This Week in Virology. I've been listening to them for since they started. Mm-hmm. So avid listener of TWIV, which is This Week in Virology. I listen to This Week in Parasitism, This Week in Bacteriology, Microbiology. So I've always been very interested. I'm always listening to these podcasts, trying to fall asleep, driving. But very, very interested in this kind of topic. So when this hit, it was kind of a perfect storm between electronics, having a supply chain. And so basically I started building a machine that can do rapid testing. PCR is pretty slow, inconvenient. It's prone to errors if it's not done right, false positives in the lab. So there's a lot of problems with PCR that I learned when I was working on it. But took everything I've learned and then put it into a new type of technology I would call rapid testing.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I've been working on for the past almost a year.
Oh, so right after the pandemic starts, you've been working on this rapid testing machine.
Yes.
How does it go?
Yeah, great. So basically, it's unlike a PCR type test, which is basically an RNA test that looks for certain patterns within the sample. But this rapid antigen test or rapid antibody testing actually it binds with pathogens in the sample. Mm-hmm. And the advantage is that you can do these tests very quickly. You can do them non-invasively, like a nasal swab.
Yeah.
Not a nasopharyngeal swab, not the one that goes all the way back to your throat, but just right inside your nostril. So.
Oh, really? So that's different from the ones that most of the people are using right now.
Right.
For the one that goes really back towards your throat.
Yeah, that's correct, Vic. That's the feared one, right, with the very long. Long
that
stem.
looks really threatening.
Yeah. So we've actually developed one together again with local manufacturers. It's just the size of a match, really. It's very, very small. So when you show that to people, they're so much less afraid of being tested.
Yeah.
When you show them a really short. Swab. So we're using, we developing this technology and working with several local companies in Taiwan to actually build the test kits, the reagents and the antibody printing, the paper, the cassettes, all that stuff is being worked on locally, which has been great.
So all the manufacturer parts are being built in Taiwan, in different factories that you've been cooperating with.
Right, and that's been important because Taiwan has been running during the whole pandemic, right? So
there's no shutdown or lockdown.
Right. So we've been able to basically run at full speed the whole time without any material shortages or anything that, as of yet. As the volumes now increase, of course we need to look more carefully about the supply chain. But at least during the development phase, that's what's so great about Taiwan, right? You can build a prototype very quickly. Mm-hmm. You don't have to send it out and wait for it to be shipped to you. You can just sit in your underwear at home in the morning with a cup of coffee, design something, email it to the vendor, or send a link to it on Google Drive, right? And then you take a shower and get in your car or on your scooter and you drive to the factory and you pick it up. Is that convenient? You know, and that, I don't know any other place on earth where you can do that. So I think that's the advantage.
Yeah, can you give us some example about how convenient that is, like compared to your previous experiences when you are living in other countries, when you want to build out a prototype in other countries? What's the major difference between building in Taiwan and building in other places?
Right. It's also a function of the size of the company. So if you're working for a big company, you have to kind of convince the manager that you need to do this purchase, and there's a paper trail, has to be signed off and approved. So of course, part of it is working for your own company, working by yourself or working with a small team, right? So you have the advantage of just being able to make very quick decisions. But once those decisions are made, you don't have to send it out for quotation to many partners, right? It takes more time. You know, time is more valuable than anything else, right? We don't have time, you know. We're all running out of time. So be able to do it quickly. And because you're doing it so quickly, you're able to go through all the cycles that you need to do during an engineering project, from design, validation, testing, modification, testing again, you know, to work at all these little kinks and bugs that happen during a design project, right? So that's the time is and convenience.
And maybe concentration as well, the concentration of the industry.
Yeah, because let's say you need a part, you need a screw. You know, you're doing a plastic part, you need a screw. There's a screw vendor next door, you know, so you can just go. The ecosystem is incredible, where you can just go to one place and you ask the people who work in the factory, and then I need to get a washer, or I need to get a rubber part, or I need to get, can you help us to find some custom stamped metal part? And everybody will know somebody who do something, because the ecosystem is put together that way. It's developed, and you can't Google these companies. A lot of them, they don't have websites.
So you need to really come to this place and get to know them like through networking or through people introducing people to you. Right.
That's the weird part of Taiwan, right? It's great if you have access to the ecosystem, but for me, it's frustrating to go to a factory somewhere and see the opportunity, all this great stuff that they're making, and they don't even have a website. And they don't market themselves to the world, but they're busy. So they already have their customer base, they already have their ecosystem, right? So they don't need to be
like getting into a bigger scale or something.
Right, because in the West, you know, it's always you want to grow and scale and grow and scale. But these companies are family businesses. They're quite happy to be at the size that they are. Yeah. You know? And they're making money and they're okay. So they don't rock the boat. And then the other thing I love about Taiwan, which is, you know, when I was working in Japan and going to China on to factories there, right? In Taiwan, you don't have to worry about people stealing your ideas or copying it or trying to sell it behind your back, or that's at least my experience here.
Did you run into that kind of experience before?
Oh yeah, I've had my products, my designs copied in China, and you know, especially as they got popular. I was working on a cell phone cable, and it was knocked off and copied. And the problem is they didn't copy it correctly. So when there was a problem with it, we would get products in return that was made by a knockoff competitor, right?
Yeah.
And they just didn't copy it correctly. So yeah, I've had that happen. And
that must feel really weird when you one day just like run upon something that's like stealing your idea, but it's not stealing it correctly.
Right. Some people say that's a compliment, right? But but it's also very annoying. So yeah.
So you also mentioned about this, like the advantage Taiwan has about this ecosystem. But do you feel that other people in other engineers in different countries know about this?
I think they don't. I think they only know that when they actually come here and experience it for themselves. I've had coworkers who kind of learn and see, you know, that I've invited over the years that I've worked with who came and visited for business trips, and I take them around to factories. I got German customers that would come here and and I would just take them with me in the car, and just drive to different factories. And they even brought their families with them, right? And they're so hospitable that, we'd go to the factory, and, the boss of the factory, they would just show their wife and his wife and their daughters the whole factory tour. It's a great experience, right, for the kids. And then they would take us to lunch, and then that builds a great relationship, right?
Oh yeah,
Starts to build trust. So I think Taiwan is kind of is unknown to a lot of people. This part of Taiwan.
And you also come to know this when you actually move here, right?
Well, I didn't. Nobody told me about this. I had to find out for myself. I had to work for many companies and travel a lot to end up here, right? So yeah.
And if we come back to the product you've been developing right now, this rapid testing machine, and you mentioned it to me that a few weeks ago you had this meeting with former Vice President Chen, talking about how your company can work with Taiwanese government in help of the current pandemic situation worldwide. Can you share a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, so it's interesting because when we started out, right, when the machine started to work and we were developing software and, this thing actually started to work, we had a lot of interest from the US and from Europe, who was experiencing, of course, high numbers of COVID. But in Taiwan, nobody was interested in the machine because there was no COVID in Taiwan, right?
Oh, there's no need.
Right. So we actually filed an emergency use authorization back in December to apply for approval by the FDA, Taiwan FDA. And then they were really great, actually. I mean, I don't know. I can imagine how the FDA works in other countries, but I know in the US, it's a huge paper mill. Takes a long time to get anything approved. But in Taiwan, of course, you just drive your scooter to the CDC, and then you go in and you talk to the guy who's handling your case, right? And, they're very helpful. They show you how to fill in the paperwork and, what you need to add. And so that was really, they even recommended us that we would change our classification from EUA to a Class 1 device, which is very valuable. So they helped us with the paperwork transition, and then while the paperwork was processing, we've been doing marketing and talking to people. Of course, improving the technology, setting up mass manufacturing and production lines and all those things. And then we've been invited to government meetings as well. So we met with Tang Feng,
Audrey
Tang. And we met with E-Tree and Gong Yan. And Taiwan government has been great. We actually have meetings set up, like you said, with the vice president. And I think now what's happening in the past couple of days, right, is that you have sporadic outbreaks. And so this has really put us back on the radar. We had planned to really do this as an export product. And we had filed this as an FDA license to export a product, but now actually the FDA helped us to reclassify it as domestic use as well. So it turns out that the timing has been, of course we don't wish that it happens, but it did happen. So now we're here and we're ready to test, right? So now we're in the final stages of approval. And of course, we're working with major airlines and the airport and hospitals and things like that. So, been very busy lately.
And how is this cooperation with the Taiwanese government is actually going to be?
That's interesting. There's the CDC, the CDE, Center for Drug Evaluation, and then you have the FDA, right? So they all kind of work on different aspects of an approval process. So we've been working with all three, and we've signed on NDAs. I'm not supposed to talk about all the details of how it works, but at least they've been very helpful, especially lately. And so I think that when it comes to the government, the thing the government really cares about is that we have followed all the rules. nobody wants to be caught in a situation where we bypassed something or we cheated on something or there's some document that we forged. So everybody's really concerned that because nobody believes that we did this.
Really?
You know,
Why is that?
we made a medical machine, right?
Yeah.
We made a medical grade machine, hardware, optics, vision processing, right, and AI, and a backend cloud. We did this in about 8 months. You know, and normally it would take probably a team of, and we did this with very few people. You know, just a handful of family, basically, my family and some friends. And we did this in just a matter of 8 months. But a lot of those 8 months has been, coding and developing and waiting too. But and doing marketing, and we've basically done the whole thing in 8 months. And it's hard for people to believe that we have done that because there's a lot of paperwork you have to go through. There's regulatory approvals, you know, EMC, EMI, like the electrical side. Then there's a lot of software validation that has to be done. There's the biological side where you have to go to a lab and you have to qualify it. So we worked with Chang'an Hospital and Taida Hospital, using their labs to do cross-reactivity testing, substance testing. So we've been on the biological side, the electrical side, the software side, and of course the overall FDA approval takes a lot of documents to do. So I think it's almost hard for somebody to believe that it could be done.
How big is your team here in Taiwan?
Well, it's just me.
It's just you.
Yeah.
So you've been doing everything about how to
and
build up and also
it's
the
just,
technology side of it.
It's just me right now in Taipei. But you know, what's good is I have my girlfriend Carol, who has been amazing to deal with the government, right? So I'm the designer, kind of architect, and she does all the dealings with the government and the filings and paperwork and accounting and all those things. So it's just the two of us here. Then we have a software team in Norway that codes and writes the backend.
How many of them are there?
3. Yeah, just 3 people. And then it's my daughter in the U.S. who handles the FDA and approvals on the U.S. side. So, and she's been doing clinical trials. So we've sent equipment to the U.S. to do clinical trials. So it's a very small team, right? And which is advantageous when you try to do something fast. It's not a lot of meetings we have to have. We just do a quick Google Meet, and then sometimes we spend hours in Google Meet. They're coding, I'm designing circuit boards. Carol's on the phone with the government. So yeah, it's very compressed. We haven't had much time for any much social life. But
yeah, you still managed to build up this, and congratulations about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And I believe the Taiwanese government would really love to cooperate with you, especially when the government is pushing forward the slogan "Taiwan can help" in the international stage.
Right.
And how do you feel that as a foreigner, as a Norwegian living in Taiwan, do you feel that you can help with this idea that Taiwan can help the international world?
Yeah, I really think so. I feel proud of Taiwan and this Taiwan Can Help movement, right? In the beginning, it was masks and ventilators, and then now recently with India, it was oxygen concentrators and tanks, right? So Taiwan is always stepping up to the plate and helping around the world. So I'm proud to be able to be part of that too, and be a part of Taiwan Can Help movement. And we also, because we're using Intel motherboard, we're also working closely with Intel. And but Intel and the government and everybody else, they have one thing in common. They really care about all the paperwork has to be done right. So everybody wants to wait for the FDA approval and the GMP stamp and all those things. So that's been the thing everybody's waiting for. It's all the approvals. Everything has been filed, so we just have to follow the process.
Yeah. And also because recently you just mentioned me about your cooperation with the government side, and maybe we can do something to help the things that's currently happening in India.
Right.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, our plan is just, as soon as we have approvals, which is happening next couple of days, really.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have built up an inventory, or we will build up a shipment. That's our plan, is to build it up for India, to send a bunch of machines to India, and working with Intel to make this, Taiwan can help with Intel inside.
Mm.
That's the kind of the slogan we want to do. So there's been a lot of people who have offered to help from everywhere, even from Intel in other places in Southeast Asia and Penang and others. Everybody wants to be a part of helping. So it's been really great.
Yeah. And so is that for all? There's one thing I want to add. Well, I was just really curious about, you said this rapid testing machine is equipped with newest technology, or is in a better form compared to the ones people are using. What's the when it comes to performance? What's the difference between your product to the others?
Right. So if you look at the rapid antigen testing versus PCR, right? Because that's kind of the debate. There's actually 3 types of tests that are approved by the FDA for travel, for example, right? And that's PCR, ELISA, which is another type of test that a lot of people don't know about, and then there's the rapid antigen testing. So the advantage of rapid antigen testing is that it's very quick to perform, whereas PCR takes time.
Yeah.
PCR has to be taken, it has to be put into a viral transport medium, and then processed in a lab, right? So our experience in the US from doing clinical trials was that there's a lot of mistakes being done in PCR. PCR is a great method. I learned that when I was working on PCR, is that it's really sensitive. So it can pick up very tiny viral loads. But that's also a problem.
So it's like producing false positive results?
Well, yeah, it can. What it can do is it can produce. It actually looks for fragments of. It can look for fragments of RNA, after an infection. So, what we like to say is that we need to separate between being infected and being infectious. So being infected means you have the pathogen replicating. But infectious means it's replicating, you're spreading it to other people. So infected means you've had the pathogen, or maybe have the pathogen, but your immune system might be fighting it. And even though after you've cleared an infection, you can still shed parts of the virus that can show up on a PCR. So with antigen testing, you actually really can detect people who are infectious to other people. So, and that's advantageous because instead of doing a PCR test 3 days before you fly, because people will take a PCR test is negative. Of course, what everybody do before they fly, right, is they hug their family members, they go out for a last dinner with everybody, go drinking a couple of times, right, and then they rush to the airport, right? So there's been a lot of cases in media and the news where people who have had a negative PCR test positive. If you look at all the cases in Taiwan that are imported cases, all of those imported cases produced a negative PCR test before flight in another country. And they came here and then they become positive. So either they were infected from the time they took the PCR test, or they were infected during transit, or there was something wrong with the PCR test when they first took it. So those are all possibilities. We discovered that PCR has a lot of, I would say a lot of false positives and false negative. And the number we found was about 1 in 60 that have some kind of problem, either a false positive or false negative, at least at that time, because it was a lot of pressure on PCR companies or companies who do testing with PCRs. There's a lot of pressure. They have sick people out because of COVID, and then they have untrained staff maybe and scrambling to handle the influx of tests. So, all those factors combined causes a lot of mistakes. We've seen mistakes in writing people's names and birth dates and everything else. So, of course, they make labeling mistakes as well. So when you separate the tests from the patient or from the traveler or the passenger for that long, any number of things can happen. Right? There's so many human handovers and transfer from human to machine, from machine to human. People type in test results, send them by email. Not all that process is automated. So what we've done is we really automated the whole process to get rid of. We always think about eliminating human error. That's why it's so important to use a machine to read these rapid tests, because we also find that when the tests are very in the beginning of an infection, when the test results are very low, it's positive, but it's a very weak positive. It's hard for the human eye to see that, especially in a high traffic environment when people are going through an airport, for example, or going into a school, everybody's rushing, and for somebody to have to sit there and make a determination for a positive test, it's very stressful. So we find during clinical trials that there was, especially for weak positives, there was a high number of professional people, doctors and nurses, who could not tell a positive test when it was weak. And that's the most dangerous, because that's when people are in the very beginning of an infection. So if you took that same test a day later, what we find is that the line is stronger. So that's really, there's a lot of advocates for these kind of testing, like Michael Mina is one that's written extensively about rapid testing, and this is really the model that we are trying to get at least Taiwan government and airports to follow. Yeah.
Okay, so except for PCR, well, maybe it's just I don't really understand the whole process of it, but because people are already using different kind of like nasal swab, like you mentioned, and what's the difference between that kind of nasal swab or one kind of rapid test, the other form of rapid test compared to yours?
Okay, so we actually don't make the actual test kits. We just work with the vendors to make the actual cassette, and the test strip inside the cassettes are made by local Taiwan companies. Academia Sinica is one producer of the antibodies, for example. So there's several companies locally who produces the actual test strips, right? But then they get put into a test cassette, and then they get labeled, and then there's a whole test kit. So we're working with these vendors to produce the entire ecosystem of testing, including reporting, right? So
the part you mentioned about minimizing human error is the major goal in building this machine, right?
That's right. Minimizing human error and making it convenient and making it safe. And then in Europe now, I think the biggest push is for validation, because what you find is there are a lot of cheating already. Even in the US, you can get fake vaccine certificates, for example. So easy to get, right? So you really need to start caring about authenticity of tests. The whole process. How do you make sure that this is really the same person that tested it? And we're also working on technology to make sure that the swab was actually done from a human or from a nose, whereas they didn't put just some water on it and develop it. There's so many ways to cheat, right? So that's some of the things we've eliminate cheating, eliminate mistakes, eliminate human error, speed up the process, making it convenient, and make it affordable. So we've come up with this word called rapid. It's called rapid testing, but for us, rapid is an acronym. So rapid stands for reliable, accurate. That's RA. P is practical, and I is inexpensive, and then D is diagnostic. So that's rapid. So we call it rapid testing. So this is really the key to opening back up again.
I hope this kind of machine can really help a lot of countries to get back to its feet as soon as possible.
Right.
And except for your product that you've been making, I want to also talk about the Norway Taiwan relationship that you've been involved here before within the 5 years you've been staying here.
Okay.
Like for example, last year you participated in the first ever, or maybe first in several decades, the national Norway National Day Parade, right?
The 17th of May, National Day, yeah.
And how did you feel about attending that?
I think that was really amazing last year. We've had 17th of May celebrations on a smaller scale every year since I've been here.
Oh, really?
I'm usually in Taiwan during May, so every year we've had some kind of celebration. Sometimes we did it in a gymnasium of a school. We've done it in a park. We've done it at somebody's house, and we've done dinners. But last year was really spectacular. It's probably the biggest one we've had so far. It was very, very well organized by the team, the local team here in Taiwan. Very, very well organized. They did a great job, and I'm so impressed by how they pulled it off. It's really well. It was planned. The media was there, and it was just really great. Yeah, they found Norwegians that I had no idea they existed. I met a lot of Norwegians for the first time.
And for the previous ones that you mentioned about holding in the park or having dinner, how big was it normally?
It's been varying every year, but there's this guy Geir Fotlund, who has been organizing it for many years, and so he was organizing it and on smaller scale, so maybe 20, 30 people before. Yeah.
Can you also tell us about what you guys usually do on a National Day Parade?
Well, the classic thing it depends what part of the country you're from. For me, I always played music. So, when I was a teenager, I was always playing drums in a marching band. So we'd go through the streets and play marches, basically. So that was my 17th of May every year, right? Dress up in a uniform and then walk around the city.
Oh.
And then everybody eats ice cream and hot dogs. And there is something called sekkeløp, which is jumping around in a kind of a canvas bag. Some people are holding a potato on a spoon, or there's kind of traditional games like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And last year, a lot of Taiwanese people also joined you guys to experience your culture as well.
It was great. Yeah, it was really good.
But
there's some videos actually. From that on Facebook and YouTube. So great.
And compared to other Northern European countries, there's not that much Norwegians here in Taiwan. Do you somehow have an idea why is that? Like compared to maybe Sweden or other countries?
Yeah, you're right. I think when I've been here now for 13 years, so I've seen a lot of Norwegians move back over the years. Sometimes get married, take their whole family back. And there's also, at least before, there was a decreasing number of expats that were here, right? Yeah. So I've seen that kind of decline. So, it seems like there's fewer and fewer students. And what I think now, though, with the success Taiwan has had in semiconductor and electronics and being operational during the pandemic and really leading the way for the world how to handle a pandemic, at least until now. That's been encouraging for a lot of people who want to come to Taiwan. So, Taiwan has a talent shortage. So, company like Hsinchu and Taipei, it's hard to get qualified people. So, always need more good skilled people to come to Taiwan and take engineering jobs, marketing. There's a lot of jobs here. That's definitely a shortage. Yeah.
You mentioned about the decline of expats here, and do you know Do you have an idea why is that?
Well, I think part of the reason that it's not necessarily my observation, but I've heard other people relate that to expats who come and take over or start a company here or take over a company here, and then over time as it grows, they get replaced by local hires or local managers. So that's kind of the trend, right? But that's just how it is. So at least I've observed that a lot of these expats have been shifted off to other jobs. Yeah.
But you are also hiring someone from Norway to join your company here, right?
Yeah, and I met him at the at the 17th of May parade last year.
Oh,
you know?
that's why you met.
Yeah, or I met him shortly. I met him at least for the preparations for that. Yeah. So he studied in Taiwan. I met him there, and then he has fortunately accepted now to come back to. He really wanted to come back to Taiwan, so I found a good position for him. So which is great. It means like we'll be able to get some help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's his job going to be?
Engineer, designer, PCB layout, electronics, circuit boards and schematics and building products. I need to find somebody who can do everything I'm currently doing, so that we can be more than one person doing the electrical part of the design. So that'll be his role.
Do you have a vision to scale up your company here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple more people who are planning to join very soon, and we have to scale up. We have an opportunity to scale up, and this is the right place to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both from a manufacturing side and from a biological side, because I think where we're going to scale up will be on logistics, procurement, purchasing, all that stuff. So. Yeah, we're definitely in a scaling phase. Yeah.
Is it also including Taiwanese joining your company?
Oh, for
as
sure.
well?
Yeah, I'm not hiring exclusively Norwegians. Yeah.
Okay.
No, this guy. It's really hard to find somebody who have that skill set combination. I think a lot of the Taiwanese companies, the big ones, Acer, Asus, Gigabyte, those guys, right? There are traditional design companies. They hire people who are electrical designers, program managers, and then PCB layout designers. There's a different person who designs the circuit that designs the circuit board. So, I always grew up in a small town, right? So we learn how to do multiple things, right?
You need to multitask.
So you need to multitask, yeah. So maybe it takes longer, but it's at least it's cross-disciplinary. So I found another guy who have that same mindset. So that's good. And he speaks great Chinese, and he loves Taiwan too. So
yeah, I'm definitely hoping to see more Norwegians expats to come and work in Taiwan. Right. And I'm also wondering when you are watching Norwegian news, do you see a trend of the impression on Taiwan for Norwegian people are shifting or are changing a bit throughout the past few years?
Yeah, I think Norway was pretty afraid of dealing with Taiwan for a long time because of the whole China issue, right?
Yeah.
And there was some political stuff going on, without going into details of that. Yeah, I'm not super proud of how Norway has dealt with Taiwan over the years. I think we could have Norway should be a lot stronger in defending Taiwan, I think, and not be bullied by China. So I'm not very happy about that part, actually, but or proud. But I think I hope it's going to come around, at least that's my hope.
Yeah, I do feel that because a lot of Norwegian news media also, they seem to be interested in Taiwan more and more, especially not just like semiconductor or the pandemic related issues, but they are also starting to explore more issues related to Taiwan, maybe cultural, maybe on the industrial side. I think that's a good trend that I've been observing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do hope that there are more that are going to talk about us more.
Well, of course, it's been a focus on the pandemic, right, and handling of the pandemic. That's where I've seen Taiwan come up in the Norwegian news. I've had some radio interviews and TV interviews in Norway that specifically were interested in knowing how Taiwan handled the pandemic. And I was actually in Taiwan during SARS-1.
Oh, really?
Yes, I happened to be in Taiwan during that period when you had the original lockdowns for SARS-1. So I was staying at a hotel that had an outbreak, actually. So I was also rushed to the hospital and verified and tested back then.
Yeah.
And they did contact tracing, and it definitely was not as organized back then as it is now. But I think that was really a wake-up call for Taiwan. I think because of that, they were so successful in handling SARS-2. Most of the Norwegian newspapers I see now are mostly talking about vaccines and vaccine passports and how they're going to handle, testing and international flights, and are they going to open up again? Or I think that's most of what I see in the newspapers right now. There's a lot of news lately about people who have been vaccinated who test positive, and various stories about vaccination and blood clotting, and which is maybe not that great because it kind of makes people fear vaccination, but at the same time, these questions need to be asked, right? So whether vaccines work or not on this grand scale, vaccines definitely work. There's no question about that. There's so many, but it's also very dangerous. It's never been done before to mass vaccinate a global population in the middle of a pandemic. It's never been done before.
Yeah.
So the concern that I have and others have is that we don't know the long-term effects of that.
Yeah. Right? And also we are doing it in a really short amount of time.
Right. And we're doing it in the middle of a pandemic. We're putting immune pressure on these organisms that are replicating. So we're mass vaccinating people with vaccines that were developed for the original Wuhan strain in a population that are going through many mutations, right? So what you see in some of these countries, if you look at some of these countries that have gone through mass vaccinations successfully, like Shales or Israel, you see the numbers will very sharply drop within a number of weeks after the vaccination starts, right? But then it doesn't go to zero. So the danger there is what is going to happen next, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to have immune escape where all these variants? Do you need another booster shot maybe for all these variants? How many booster shots are you going to have? Can we vaccinate the whole world population for all the strains that are coming out? Can we vaccinate faster than the strains, than the virus can mutate?
Yeah.
Right. So it's an arms race between the mutations and the vaccine. So that's really the scary part. So no matter whether the vaccines work or not, because they definitely work, right? At least in the short term, they protect they can protect the person who gets the vaccine, at least, right? But no matter if they work or not, I think the answer to this is really testing. Testing at point of entry. So in other words, you need to test at the airports. You need to test people before they fly and after they arrive with inexpensive, practical tests, tracking the result. This is the CDC guidelines. Is a test. Test people, track and inform. So I think this is really this is what we've been working on the whole time, is to build a mass testing system that is trackable and is anonymous. We don't keep any patient data or any personal information. We just keep a track of the results on a a global map, so you can see where the infection is and how they're spreading. So that's our grand goal, and through our German office, we've been working with we're getting the attention of the WHO already. So, which is a little awkward with Taiwan, right?
It's fine. We are like really used to this.
Yeah, so because we can't work with them directly now, we're working through the German office, which is also okay.
Oh, you also have a German office?
Yes, we've set up a German office with a good friend. So they have 4 people in Germany now, and we have a U.S. base in Atlanta, Georgia, that close to the CDC. So
that's where your daughter is?
Yes, okay. That's right. Yeah. So so this is part of the what we really hope is we can build a global network of these testing machines. And these testing machines are not just for COVID-19, right? They're also for testing immune response. They're testing for antibodies and neutralizing antibodies. So what that means is you can actually use these tests to test if somebody, after vaccination or a natural infection, you can test somebody's immune response. And that's important, right? So you can see how well somebody's protected over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, we can test for HIV, Zika, dengue fever, and about 200 other different pathogens already.
So it's going to be applicable even in the future when we are fighting other viruses as well.
Right. So I think the problem in this round, right, we didn't have a global epidemic response system. We didn't have something in place where we could quickly rush out test kits and stop the spread, right? So if we can have machines like these spread around airports and hospitals and universities and schools, and as a part of a global response program, to where when the next outbreak happens, not if, when, we are ready, and there's a network of companies who can quickly produce lateral flow assays, which is the technology used in these test kits, to quickly test people to see if they're infected or not, right? So that they can be treated properly, right? Because that's the thing, they need to be isolated and incubated, right? And then they can return. So, and that's true for a lot of other pathogens too. For example, dengue fever, right? Singapore has a big problem with this. There's other pathogens, right? So Zika in South America, for example. So it's not a question of if, it's when the next pandemic happens. So that's what we're really trying to do, is to put in, with designing the global infrastructure. That's my dream, at least, to design a global infrastructure of testing that can be accessible by the FDA, by the CDC, by the WHO. All these organizations and government will have access to the system, so they can track pandemics in real time and testing.
Yeah.
That's our goal. And we're doing that right here in Taiwan.
That's really nice. You're having this big dream, and you think that Taiwan is the place for you to build up this. I think that's a really good thing.
Absolutely, because there's one thing a lot of people misunderstand, right? When it comes to, for example, medical machines, right? This medical machine has very little to do with biology. There's a tiny part of this machine that has to do with receptor binding domain and a virus in an antigen that binds in a chemical reaction, and it releases some color particles, right, inside the lateral flow assay. So this part is just one tiny part of the whole system, right? Everything else is aluminum, CNC, injection molding, 3D printing, cables, power supplies, LEDs, circuit boards, silicon, software, firmware, EEPROMs, chips, Wi-Fi, network transmission, coding, cloud computing, scalable back-end systems, right? So all of that stuff, like 99% of it has nothing to do with biology. It's all technology, right? And we source that here locally within 20, 30 minutes. So this couldn't do it without it.
This this perspective is really not something that even us Taiwanese know. Like if you
Right.
are outside of the industry, you basically don't have this knowledge that actually Taiwan can provide such a big benefit for
Right.
engineers worldwide, but we are not marketing it.
Right. And don't tell them. Let's keep this a secret.
Yeah. Last but not least, I'm also wondering if you think that Taiwan and Norway can build up a more cooperation. Which area do you think that is the potential ones?
Oh, I would love to see a trade office there again. They used to have a trade office there that was run, many years ago, run by a final gentleman, Geir Torkehagen. It was great. I wish they could ever do that again. That'd
And
be
right now
awesome.
you are running as the contact person for Norway's office in Singapore. Is it?
Yeah, I've become the kind of point of contact for the Norwegians in Taiwan. Right, it's not a very difficult job. It's just in case of some natural emergency or something that I'm supposed to be a point of contact. But that's right.
Okay.
Mm.
Thank you so much for today. It's been really
Vic,
informative.
thank you very much. It was great. Thank you so much.
And also, like, happy National Day for Norway.
Gratulerer med dagen.
Gratulerer med dagen.
Gratulerer med dagen. Yes.
Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.